Hello, one and all in Feverland. Checking in. It's the offseason. We had exit interviews with the Fever last Friday, and it's officially about to be October offseason time for them. The playoffs still rolling, but questions to be answered for the Fever heading into this crucial period, the first offseason with Cailtin Clark on the team. I'd like to first say congrats to a lot of the roster for making the playoffs and having the season that they had, in the coaching staff and the front office. First time that's happened in 8 years, and that is a super long stretch of terrible play and deserves to be celebrated, breaking such a curse. I mean, people have talked a lot about the Chicago White Sox recently because they lost 121 baseball games. That White Sox team's winning percentage was almost double the Fever's 5-31 record from a couple years ago. So a remarkable turnaround. Glad for everyone. The Fever clearly trending in the right direction. That was a key takeaway from X interviews to me, is especially from those who have been here for the last couple years, it's so obvious to everyone involved that this team is headed in the right direction, right? Things are trending in the right way. They have a great young core. They have good pieces around them, but they know what they need, right? They saw what they need against Connecticut. They saw what the best teams can do. They know they need to defend better, both as players and potentially schematically. They know now, but they also clicked after a 1-8 start and were an exceptionally good, 19-12 team after that run that knows, hey, if we could sustain that for a whole season, that's a 27-28 win team pushing the 4-5 seed already in their first year of whatever you want to call this core era. Maybe the second year if you consider the Sides Boston year as the start of this era, whatever it is. Very early in this era of Fever basketball, and they're already in the postseason. They already were very close to winning a postseason game on the road against a premier team. I'm going to predict that the Connecticut's going to beat Minnesota and reach the finals just for funsies. I think it's going to be Ace's son. We'll see what happens. But the Fever should be proud of the season they had. And that was kind of what was talked about at X interviews, among many things for these players. You can watch all those right here on this channel, by the way. Many of you already have. It's been a couple days. But a lot of people proud of the season they had, especially in the infancy of this era of Fever basketball. But that's not really what I wanted to do this video for. I wanted to do this video because we got a press release today from the WNBA announcing the expansion draft, which really is kind of the outlining principle around what's about to happen for the Fever. It's their first offseason with expectations. And there's a lot that kind of hovers over this offseason before we get into what we know of the expansion draft and what's going to come for the Fever in the next few months as free agency comes. What I would like to say is I think Lynn Dunn's done a very good job since being rehired as GM. That said, this is a much different offseason than her first two, right? The first one she had taking over in 2022, free agency had already started. Tamika Catchings really ran the first 2 weeks of that and didn't step down until, I want to say, Valentine's Day of that year. So Dunn came in a little late. Some signings and moves have already happened at that time. She still made moves, traded Tierra McCowan right away, but that was later in that process, right? So that's one thing that I think is interesting about that. And then last offseason, of course, drafting Leah Boston, and then the most recent one, drafting Cailtin Clark. The things that stood out about those is they had the first overall pick, right? And they were clearly still building. Now, last year, they signed Katie Lou Samuelson. They signed Damiris Dantas. Yes, there was certainly some expectation of getting veterans in the door to get better. But when you have the top pick, you're still sort of building. So I only bring that up to say this is Lynn Dunn's first winter or offseason free agency period, whatever you want to call it, where the goals are different. It's not about blending youth and high-end talent. Yeah, the Fever wanted to make the playoffs this last year, but there were a lot of ways that could go. This time, it's very obvious. They need depth, they need defense, and they're trying to win right now. They cannot really bridge things any longer. And this is also the first time she doesn't have a very high pick. Their top pick in this draft will be 7th, 8th-ish. I can't remember. We don't know for sure where the Valkyries are going to be in the upcoming WNBA draft, the expansion franchise. So I think that's going to be interesting. How does their shifted circumstance for the first time, a deserved change in circumstance because they won a lot of games, change how this offseason looks for Lynn Dunn and co. And it all starts with this expansion draft, which we have learned from the league, finally, will be December 6th. Golden State will do their expansion draft. It's just one team, so it's a little easier. The last expansion draft back in 2008, the Atlanta Dream, that was also only one team, so some similarities there. What we learned is that every team can, this is what was expected because this kind of happened last time, will be able to protect, for lack of a better term, 6 players. The league's calling it a roster list that will be submitted. So the Fever will have a roster list of 6 that includes every player they have rights to. So on their roster actively, on their suspended list for a contract suspension, on their draft list. I don't think the Fever have anybody on a draft list. I'd have to double check. That's core eligible, like Cailtin Mitchell, and their retired list. And then 6 of those players will be protected. And those players who are protected cannot be picked by Golden State in the expansion draft. Of the unprotected players, they can pick 1. Right? They cannot pick more than 1 player on a certain team. That will be absolutely fascinating to see how it shakes out. We just learned from Ari Chambers over at ESPN's Andscape that the league will not be releasing who teams decide to protect. Maybe we hear it leaked out. Maybe we see an unprotected list that in turn shows us who the protected players are, but I'm not sure we're going to know. Some stuff that I think is important to point out in this process. There's no point of a team protecting an unrestricted free agent. So Erica Wheeler, I'll use as an example, the Fever guard. She's an unrestricted free agent. The Fever have no reason to protect her, and the Valkyries have no reason to pick her. The Valkyries could pick Erica Wheeler, but then she's unrestricted and she could sign somewhere else. Why would the Valkyries do that? Why would the Fever waste a protected slot on a player that they could just sign, right? So totally unrestricted free agents, not reserved, not cored, none of that, make very little sense to protect in these draft scenarios, at least via my interpretation of these rules. I think that's going to be an interesting wrinkle to this. There's some obvious stuff. Aaliyah Boston's getting protected. Cailtin Clark's getting protected. And I'll go through my guesses in a second. But how this actually shakes out is going to be fascinating to me. And we'll be revealing about the future of certain players. The part that I don't quite know is related to Cailtin Mitchell and her getting cored. She is core eligible, which to me means if she is on the core list, that would mean that the Fever can protect her and then core her. For those who don't know what that is, a core offer is something you can give to a player who's been with your franchise for a certain amount of time and to keep them around. Players are eligible for it if they would otherwise become a restricted or unrestricted free agent to get right or first refusal, but it's not every player is eligible for them. Cailtin Mitchell it's a 1-year Supermax offer immediately, and then the Fever can negotiate with Mitchell later on. I don't want to get too much into the core part yet. I'll get more into the Fever specifics of their offseason after the expansion draft and once the lottery's done, so the draft order is known. But just to know, my expectation right now is that the Fever can protect Cailtin Mitchell and core her and be able to negotiate with her exclusively if they want to this summer. So my prediction, if I were Lynn Dunn, I'm not, obviously you can see me on the screen. If I were Lynn Dunn, I would protect the starting 5 that closed the season for the Fever, and not the playoffs like the regular season. So Cailtin Clark, Cailtin Mitchell, assuming that's allowed, which my interpretation is yes, it is. Lexi Hall, Nalissa Smith, and Aaliyah Boston. And then I personally think their 6th protection should be Temi Fagbenle. As we saw in the playoffs, she's a very good player. She's restricted free agent, so the Fever, assuming Temi's coming back to the league, would have the chance to make her restricted and keep her around for another year. That makes the most sense to me. They have lots of other players who are valuable. Katie Lou Samuelson, Damiris Dantas gave them something at various times throughout the season and would hurt to lose. Dantas in particular would be tough to lose. I saw some people suggesting they should protect Dantas. To me, they should be protecting their highest, outside of the obvious, their best players. They should be protecting their highest trade value players and then moving on from that. And if I'm the Valkyries and the Fever protect the 6 players that I personally just said, I would pick Grace Berger of the Fever's available 6 players, an all-rookie guard from 2 years ago who's still young and inexperienced. Maybe they would pick Dantas, maybe they'd pick Samuelson, who knows. That's what I would do. And then I could think about trades with some other of the players that I have left over if I'm the Fever. So that's kind of what I'm thinking if I'm expansion drafting for the Fever. High-level overview before the expansion draft. Cailtin Mitchell, unrestricted free agent, but could be cored, which is very relevant to her offseason. Erica Wheeler is going to be an unrestricted free agent. Temi Fagbenle will be a restricted free agent. And then also relevant, Celeste Taylor's money, because she got paid for the time she was with the Fever, comes off the Fever's books this offseason, as does Victoria Vivian's money that came via a buyout. You add in all those sums of money of free agents, the Fever could have quite a bit of cap space, maybe even in the middle of the 400,000s to sign players Maybe they want to bring back Wheeler at a smaller number. But remember, they have a first-round pick, so perhaps that could eat up some of that money. Who knows what Vag Benley's number would come in at. But they could also get rid of some players that they may not want around. Lots of unprotected contracts. Christy Wallace, Grace Berger, Victoria Saxton, for example. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of money, and a very interesting summer ahead. The other part I should point out is the CBA could expire after next season, so lots of players might be interested in signing one-year deals to be a free agent again next summer. So lots of little moving parts for the Fever this summer. I'll get more into free agency and transactional details and what I would expect to happen with all those players I just talked about, again, after the expansion draft, once it's known who the Fever roster is, what their cap reality could be, who is or isn't back, and we can move from there. And the Fever could, in theory, like in the last expansion draft, trade away a draft pick to entice the Valkyries not to pick a certain player or something like that. So still lots of moving parts, still super hard to really nail down what the Fever should do. But in terms of the expansion draft that we learned about today and a high-level overview of what to expect in the coming months for the Fever, that's my take on it. That's what we know and don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed this season and are enjoying these little videos. I've never really done Fever videos like this. I'm aiming for this 10 to 12 minute mark. If you'd like longer, shorter, let me know. I'm open to feedback. This is only my third or fourth one of these. I only started in the playoffs. I really regret not starting sooner. Thank you guys for listening to this. If you learned something, that's great. Let me know. If you have more questions, let me know. I'll try to answer some to the extent that I know the answers to or could inquire with people who would know, who are in the league or around the players. Fever season was fun. Hope you guys enjoyed the rest of the playoffs. Please keep watching. The teams left are very good and deserve your attention. We'll see you very soon.